The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar called Managing Driver Speed in Fleets. My name is Dave Nichols and I'm Professional Engagement Officer here at Brake. Thank you very much everyone for attending today, and hopefully you'll find this webinar useful in your line of work. Thank you also to Telegis for sponsoring this event, which has been made possible for it to be free for everybody to attend. So thank you to them. Hopefully you can all hear us fine and see the presentations on the screen. As we go through the presentations, we will hear from each speaker. If you'd like to contribute and ask a question at all, then please use the question box on the right of your drop-down menu. At any point during the presentation, you can type a question in there and we will put it to the panel. Also, all attendees are muted and in listen-only mode at the moment. If you would like to ask your question verbally, then please click on the raise hand icon, which is in the top right-hand corner of your screen, and I can unmute you and you can ask your question to any of our speakers today. So that's the basics over. So as I mentioned, my name's Dave and I work with Brake, the road safety charity. Hopefully many of you already work with Brake and know what we do, but for those of you who are new, Brake is a road safety charity that's been going for 20 years. We have support services for road crash victims and bereaved families who've lost loved ones in road crashes. And as part of that, we do a lot of campaign and education work to try and prevent crashes happening in the first place. One of the ways we do this is importantly working with people like yourself who work in fleets and employ out-work drivers to try and prevent crashes happening whilst people are driving for work. So for today's topic, here's just a few points of why it's important that we need to tackle speed, not only for out-work drivers, but generally on our roads. Obviously, the faster we drive, the less time we have to react, and the harder we hit somebody, and the more likely the outcome will be death or serious injury. It's important to recognise and communicate this to drivers that crashing at any speed can result in death or injury. So the objective of driving more slowly is not to crash at slower speeds, but is obviously to drive slowly enough to stop in time when a hazard inevitably presents itself. So just a small increase in speed can mean a much bigger stopping distance. Higher speeds also contribute to loss of control, particularly when roads are slippery, on bendy roads, or when making inappropriate manoeuvres associated with drivers in a hurry. So this can be things like overtaking or driving near to a bend or brow, typically on rural roads. So unsurprisingly, therefore, speed is a primary factor in a third of road deaths and a factor in all collisions. So here is a graph that highlights the situation and is a very good graph for you to communicate with your drivers, showing the typical stopping distances. And as you can see, the blue figure is the thinking distance and the red is the stopping distance. So obviously the thinking time remains the same, but the faster you're travelling, the more distance you're going to cover. Another handy graph that we often use to highlight the fact is this particular graph here, which shows the impact of speed. I think this works really well with many companies that we work with to highlight the devastating impact that speed can have. So, for example, if a driver is breaking the speed limit by only a small amount, for example, driving 35 in a 30 area, it shows there that actually after 3 car lengths, that driver would still be driving at 34 miles an hour. And if they were to hit anybody at that speed, the person they hit would be the equivalent of them falling from a 4th floor building. So it's a really impactful way of showing how important it is to reduce your speed, especially when you're driving in communities and around schools and shops and homes, because driving and slowing down to 20 miles an hour can make a real difference and be the difference between life and death at the end of the day. So this is where you can come in and make a difference, hopefully. Obviously, 1/3 of crashes involve out-work drivers, and out-work drivers also are 40% more likely to be involved in a crash. So this is particularly important why we need businesses and companies that employ drivers for work across the country to take action and make sure that they are educating their drivers and passing on messages. So today we will hear from speakers who do this on a daily basis and can tell you and show you how it can be practically achieved. The financial cost, as well as obviously the appalling human cost of loss of life, speeding can be expensive for companies. So as well as obviously the obvious costs of collisions, such as a driver being injured, absent from work, the vehicle damage and insurance premium hikes, driving at excessive speed can also increase company fuel consumption and as a result can increase both the cost and the environment impact of a fleet. So driving at lower speeds in an eco-friendly manner can reduce your carbon emission and save your company obviously money on fuel. As I mentioned previously, out-work drivers are particularly prone to speeding. A survey that Brake conducted found that 41% of out-work drivers admitted to driving at 35 miles an hour or above in a 30 zone at least once a week. So there are several work-related factors which may lead employees to drive at unsafe speeds. So these include time pressure to get to meetings and schedule deliveries, peer pressure, payment by results, work-related stress, and also overall it's a lack of education on the dangers of speed and the benefits of slowing down. So this is why it's really important that you can get this message across to your drivers, and we'll look at ways today that can be achieved. Overall, all organisations employing anyone who drives as part of their job should have a robust speed policy in place. So this policy should require your employees never to exceed the speed limit and always drive according to road conditions. And as I mentioned, we will hear about this more as we go on today. So many of you who already work with Brake will be fully aware of our pledge. It's based on 6 key educational messages that we can get across to drivers to make a difference. And as you see there, one of our main pledges is slow. So this is the pledge that we ask all drivers to take to say that they will stay under limits and slow down to under 20 miles an hour around schools, homes and shops to protect others. So it's important that people do slow down right for bends, brows and bad weather and avoid overtaking. If anybody is interested in finding out more about our pledge and how we can work with companies, then please do let us know afterwards. So that's me done to start with. So to continue, I will pass you over to Sergio Barata from Telegis, and he is going to talk to you about the importance of telematics and how this can play an important role in your driving. Thanks, Sergio.
Thanks, David. Good afternoon, everybody. Obviously, I'm going to share with you a Telegis-centric view on this. We've got some good experience with some very large and some small to medium fleets trying to make good on their commitments to the business to reduce, crash and risk within the organization, and ultimately just make the environment that their employees work in a safer place. Just to give you some examples, some of our customers who work in industrial or even technical services tell us statistically that driving to the jobs that their employees carry out is the most dangerous thing that they can do. They might end up on site, climbing very tall ladders or using very dangerous equipment and tools, but it's actually in the vehicle that's the most dangerous part of their day. So again, every conversation we've had with companies and with enterprises has been different. Everybody is got their own operational structures and their own objectives and probably their own reasons for getting there in the first place. But what I'd like to share with you today is really just a view and really a generic best practice that we've seen work very effectively and very well with the programs we've been involved in. So in terms of agenda, I'm going to keep it as light as I can in terms of introductions and discussions around Telligis and certainly around the slides. It'll be more interactive. I'd like to show you and share with you some of the tools, the coaching applications, the actual telematics applications that carry the key data that organizations can use to drive that behavioral change. And then, as Dave said, towards the end, more than happy to address any questions or answer anything that you want to bring up. So very quickly, in terms of Telligis, just so that you've got the context of our perspective and who we are as an organization. We're a US software company founded in California. I manage our UK office. I manage a team of about 30 employees here in the UK. And we're essentially developing and deploying telematics and connected intelligence solutions for our customers. Driver behavior as a trend, driver behavior as a solution has become a key focal point for nearly all of our customers in the last 2 to 3 years for various reasons. And certainly through the discussion today, I'll share some of those with you and be interesting to see if they resonate or if those are your experiences as well. So in terms of some of the drivers and some of the key environmental realities in our space, the Internet of Things is having a big impact. This is a overly used term, but actually in this particular conversation, it's a reality that can be leveraged and can be used to deliver better driver behavior and better adoption and better sustainability of these types of programs. So it's certainly something that I'll discuss and lean on and show you examples of during our 10-15 minutes. In our minds, what is connected intelligence? Well, really, everyone on this call has some relationship with some kind of field-based fleet, whether that's, people committed to driving to work and back every day, or whether it's people who are actually using these vehicles to deliver services, etc. And having that connectivity that is very much part of the modern enterprise, like I say, can be used to really drive results and keep the employees safe at the same time. I'm going to now switch over to some of the tools that we use to actually impact and implement these programs. But before I do, I'll just quickly spend just 2 minutes on, in my opinion, some of the key basic elements that have to be part of any successful driver behavior safety program. First, obviously, stakeholders. In our world, typically this is the employees themselves. These, the elements that they're really focused on is making sure that the data and the experience through the driver behavior program tools are consistent, are reliable, and are fair. This is still very much a people-centric technology, and driving the roads today is a very dynamic environment, and so the technology and the strategy needs to show a very balanced yet defined approach. There's obviously line managers, supervisors. They certainly don't want to take on this responsibility and have significant additional overhead with that. They want to make sure that these systems are easy to implement, easy to defend. They don't want to disrupt their workforce. They want to make sure that the solutions that are implemented show that fairness, show that responsibility. Health and safety, executives and organizations within the businesses that we work with, they're there to really drive the safety metrics. They're really there to drive safety excellence. So certainly they are part of the group within the business that perhaps defines, what is safe driving, what is a safe score for a driver, etc. And then, of course, the leadership. Every organization has a leadership that have to essentially invest in these programs. They have to believe in the ROI. They have to believe in the importance. And having, a product and a tool that can show and define those elements and make them very easy to extract is part of the success. So those are I'm not saying that's an exhaustive list, but that's certainly let's say the core elements in terms of the stakeholders. In terms of tools, again, this is a Telligence-centric view. There's other ways to do this out there certainly. But in our experience, the tools are really broken down between a fleet telematics interface, and this is typically your central place for the business intelligence, for the administration of the portal, etc. In our world, we have a product called Telligence Coach, which is a mobile application. This is a self-assessment based approach where the drivers, the employees themselves can actually log into their own profiles, look at their own driving style, measure against their colleagues, a leaderboard style type approach, and take the responsibility upon themselves to make sure that they're doing what it takes to improve those scores. There's in-cab alerts. So of course, in our world, we believe very much in audible in-cab alerts. We don't focus on any real-time visual elements in the vehicle. We try to keep that distraction to a minimum. However, having some real-time feedback to the drivers when they're infringing or when they're doing something in the vehicle that needs to be recognized as as breaching some kind of protocol, it really does help having that real-time feedback for them. Training, of course, closing the loop in terms of understanding where the issues are and then, addressing that with specific training and trying to make that as real-time as possible. So I'll show you in a second how we do that. And then finally, generally company culture, promoting the driver, safety programs. So in our world, we engage with the marketing organizations at our customers in many situations, and we actually help put the collateral in place. We work with people like Brake to help us do that as well, because it is an education process. It needs to be, adopted as such, and if that is the case, then certainly making the program sustainable is much more likely. And then just finally, before I get into the tools, is the strategy. How are our customers going to bring on this technology, bring on this new commitment, and how are they going to make that work? It's not easy to do. There's some fleets out there that are significant in numbers, but typically the strategy we work with our customers is that we try to get a baseline of the data. So we install the units that are there to measure and to provide that in-cab alerting, etc. We leave it running for like a month or 2-month period, so we can actually baseline the business. We can actually understand and get a good understanding of what that behavior looks like today. We then start turning on in-cab alerts. This is done in conjunction with some training and some education with the drivers, so that they have a period of time where they can actually see, based on the thresholds that have been configured and set up for their business, they can actually see where they've infringed or where they're speeding. We implement posted speed limit information in our technology, so they can get that real-time experience in terms of where they should be slowing down, as you saw the impact of that with Dave's slide. And then obviously there's the launch period, or what we call the pre-launch period, and this is typically like a grace period for the drivers. They will be looking at the applications and actually seeing their scores, and typically we work with our customers to say, look, the baseline showed that the average score without any education, without any tools across the business, was 50%. Let's drive that over a period of time to sort of 85–90%, and let's give the drivers like a 1 or 2 month time frame to actually try and reach that themselves without any without any HR or any disciplinary processes or any reviews, etc., with any driver debriefs, let them try and actually hit those scores. And then at some point, you actually turn the program on, you go live, and then it becomes very much part of the operational cadence. So
hi, Sergio. Sorry to interrupt just there. We're back onto just seeing the map of the countries. I don't know if you need to go back onto your.
No, I'm gonna start showing the application now. So that was that was just the opportunity to frame the conversations that we have typically and the tools that we leverage. So everything I'm going to show you now will essentially play back to that narrative. So first and foremost, what I'm showing you here is dashboards, business intelligence across any fleet, any organization. We use, it's critical if you're going to start measuring individuals that you accurately understand who's driving the vehicle, when they're driving the vehicle, and that any infringements or any scores or any data that you're putting with their name on it is accurate. If you don't do that, clearly that creates its own issues and creates adoption problems for everybody. So that said, having all that data, and it's a significant amount of data that you can generate over any size fleet, being able to play that back to the business, being able to break it down and really understand, the time frames, where the infringements are you trending up, are you trending down, where do you sit in terms of your peers? These are all critical factors in every organization's ability to then, sort of change the behavior and really put programs in place to do that. But in order to do that, you have to have some key fundamental elements in place, like the ability, for example, to have a very strong hierarchy built into your system. If you have a big enough fleet, this could get pretty complicated pretty quickly, and you need to be able to, define where this data goes, who manages this data, who sees this data, etc. So, for the purposes of this discussion, I'm picking Dan Lancaster here in his Audi. He will be the person that we're looking at in terms of data and in terms of their information. So from a fleet interface, from a perspective where you have to go and implement and administrate this, that is the tool we use. Now I'm going to show you. I'm going to project the mobile application from my handset to the screen. And just give me a second to get that done. And I will show you what the Telligis Coach application looks like. Okay. So again, as part of that sort of initial discussion, in our opinion, these technologies and these solutions can only work if you have the full attention of the drivers and the employees themselves. Another sort of term that's used a lot is the gamification of technology. There is a lot of commercial and enterprise-centric applications today that people are leveraging, their iPhone or their Android experience to improve, basically. And we've done the same thing with a product called Telligis Coach. So if I go into the app, again, there's Dan Lancaster, who I saw earlier. If you look in the background, you can see his score is 21, and you can see in the application he has a similar experience. You can actually see through the application where his infringements have been. His hard braking is not so bad, his hard acceleration is fine, but his excessive speeding is a real problem, and his speeding over the limit is also a problem. This is where he's losing points, basically. So if I'm Dan, this is me and I'm logging in and I want to have an understanding of where this is happening, I can actually go into the application. It will show the specific instances of where that happened and when that happened, and I can actually pull that up on a map. Just using a bit of bandwidth here in my office. Sorry, 1 second. And what it does is give some credibility to the process, basically. So, you know, here, for example, Thursday the 4th of June, you know, in Leicester, I was doing 78 miles an hour when I probably shouldn't have been. I can actually go into that particular infringement. I can look at it on a map, and very importantly, I can also discuss it. So if you see the discuss button, perhaps on a speeding, you know, on a speeding infringement, there's probably not much to discuss. But if you've been harsh braking or you've been in some other driver behaviors, you know, elements, you can discuss it. You know, you can push that to your line manager and say, you know, somebody braked in front of you and you had to react or you had to do something. But the bottom line is that contributes to this message of fairness and this message of, you know, putting a system in place that is a reasonable approach. There's also a leaderboard. So of course you can get measured against your peers. You can make the other people that you measure against. You can anonymize the names so you don't see them for privacy reasons if that's, you know, if that's a requirement. So it really does provide real-time visibility and access to that information. Then in terms of training, so we use this app as a training portal as well. Our customers can actually upload training videos, you know, based on what they're seeing with the data that they're getting back. So if they're seeing that a lot of their employees are speeding or doing any other kind of specific infringement, they can actually pull this content into the application, and the drivers themselves can actually be obliged to, you know, view this training, consume the training, and provide any feedback if that's what they're required. So it really is an attempt to try and between the fleet product, between the in-cab alerts, this application, and the ability to do the training, it really does provide you with enough tools to get this implemented and drive the change. The last thing I'll just show you in this app is also within the application itself. Again, you can see I can turn off GPS tracking. So you can actually make sure, you know, in terms of privacy, every company has a different directive, every company has a different style as far as this goes. But again, you know, you can actually manage those particular questions and those particular situations with employees by showing them that this is, you know, this is a fair but, you know, defined program and process. So I think in terms of the tools, that's pretty much all I wanted to show you and share with you today. Appreciate that's quite a bit of information. You're more than welcome to reach out or ask any questions during the session. In terms of what happens next, in terms of the future of driver behavior and opportunities to reduce speeding, I think certainly what we're looking at next is, if I just find a way to present this, sorry. So there is plenty of data in the vehicles that we can still get today that can help improve speeding and certainly improve the safety elements of any fleet. We have quite a large OEM initiative. We have, you know, programs of Ford and GM and some of the larger fleet providers. And in doing that, you can start getting access to additional data like seatbelt usage, you know, tire pressures. You know, in the Internet of Things paradigm, you really want the vehicle to be active in this discussion and provide you with as much information so that you can absolutely manage the driver and ensure that the environment that he's driving in is well managed and is the best that you can do, basically. So in closing, from our side, reducing speed using this technology really is all about making sure that you've got the means to measure the metrics, the philosophy and the culture within the business to set the goals and really drive those improvements and find ways to keep the program sustainable and make sure that, you know, what you implement in month 1 is very much part of the culture and part of the process, you know, in month 45, basically. So from my side, thank you for listening. Thanks for your attention, and over to you, Dave.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Sergio. That's really interesting, and we've got some discussion already, so I've got a couple of questions that I'll go straight into launching for yourself, and hopefully you can help. So first question is coming from Richard Smith, who says you baseline the business, but do you benchmark against other businesses or fleets of a similar nature? And how strong is the correlation between poor driving behaviours and actual crashes?
Okay, I'll take the first part first. So because we do have a fairly significant, let's say, install base. I think we manage close to 500,000 vehicles globally. We definitely have what we call internally as performance indexes. We certainly know per industry, per region, per geography, what those driving styles, what those best case scenarios look like in terms of metrics. And we definitely share those with our customers. We're exposed to many verticals. For example, aviation industry. You can imagine driving on an airport next to big A380 airplanes has a very different index to somebody like in the courier business, so to speak. So we certainly carve it up as much as we can to provide that perspective to our customers. And the second part is, yes, definitely. We have every customer is different, but in terms of actual ROI, actual feedback in terms of the improvements in accident rates, in risk versus, let's say, previously when they weren't managing these elements, there is a very direct correlation between the two.
Brilliant. No, thank you very much for that. And another one from Paul Prosser, who says, how accurate is the GPS? He says their current system raises a significant amount of false readings, especially where the road runs alongside a motorway.
Yes. Okay. So that is, we use, so I guess one of our key, I would say, differentiators is that we actually use our own geospatial technology. We don't use, for example, Google Maps or Bing Maps to provide the experience. We use our own technology, and in being able to do that, we're actually snapping and using several technologies to make sure that we are giving an accurate read. What I can say is that, again, just using the aviation industry, because it's an extreme place to implement a driver safety program, in that world, we're literally creating geofences and markers that are as close between, the first class door and the business class door on a plane, basically. So we have to accurately measure when our customers' vehicles are in those positions to execute on safety programs and jobs and that sort of thing. So the GPS is very accurate.
Brilliant. And just one final question here as well, and this will probably be relevant for all our other speakers as well. David Campbell says, in general, are drivers supportive to telematics and a scoring system?
So generally, they're not supportive of telematics. This is very much, the initial message I was talking about, bringing in the culture and the collateral and the marketing organizations within these companies. Generally speaking, telematics has, big brother connotations. It has a negative impact on the workforce. But if you position it as a driver safety program, and if you really lean on some of the elements I showed, for example, in the demo, where you're absolutely showing them that you're proactively trying to make it a fair environment, where you're not trying to catch them out. It's about their safety. It's about measuring their safety and giving them some of the responsibility, through the self-assessments and through the coaching apps to do something about it. I do think we have found a far better adoption versus, let's say, previously, we used to use scorecards. People used to get emailed scorecards. The line managers would print out scorecards, try to do driver debriefs, that sort of thing, once a day, once a week. It does create a confrontational experience. even the line managers themselves, they don't have the bandwidth, to really measure these accurately or to manage them accurately. So the whole program feels like it's, becomes an overhead and almost like an irritation for everybody. But if you implement it with the right tools and you can make the experience as light as possible and as accurate as possible, then we have found that the drivers will absolutely get behind it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Sergio. Really, thank you very much for your time. And as I said before, if anybody does have any questions at all during this afternoon's webinar, then please do use the question box on your drop-down menu and do put any questions, and we can easily go back to Sergio maybe at the end if we have time. So hopefully that helps, and hopefully, David, with regards to supporting telematics and getting driver buy-in, hopefully the case studies and the information that you'll hear from our other speakers later on will help with that as well. So now I will hand over to Nigel Lawrence from Applied Driving Techniques.
Thank you, David, and good afternoon, everybody. Nigel Lawrence, Customer Experience Manager at Applied Driving Techniques. Just a very quick introduction about us as a business. We're a specialist fleet risk management consultancy. So we very much look to help organisations ensure they have the relevant, should we say, policies, processes and steps in place so that those employees who drive on business are legally compliant and reducing and mitigating risk where absolutely possible. So in terms of today and the general theme of tackling speed through training and assessment, I'm going to talk through just a few short slides through the areas that we've got mentioned here. So I'll talk a little bit around process, policy and how that can be implemented effectively within an organisation, also a little bit around hierarchy of control and how that can be applied. A little bit around training interventions and how training can be targeted and focused where necessary. Probably one of the most important parts is, without a doubt, the safety culture and how that is implemented over a period of time within an organisation. And then just a short summary to follow. So when attempting to tackle and mitigate risk within an organisation, the absolute most important part of any part of that process should, at the very start, be to understand where those risks occur and where the issues are within the organisation. And policy is a really important part of that, in that drivers need to be absolutely 100% certain and clear what the organisational policy is around driving on business, and making sure as an organisation that there's an absolute clear audit trail in place, that drivers are aware of where to find the policy, what the policy guidelines are and how they should be adhering to them. And I think, again, another part is making sure that there's a regular checking process in terms of policy being applied consistently across the business, which that ultimately comes down to buy-in from the business as a whole, and that would very much be the case from the upper part of the business and from senior management level downwards. So again, ensuring that's applied consistently is extremely important. So buy-in from line managers and supervisors, again, is another important part. So in line with HSE guidance, the most important thing is to ensure that all drivers are risk assessed accordingly, and essentially looking at the three real fundamental areas, which the driver, the journey and the vehicle, to provide kind of an overall risk profile for all drivers who drive on business with the organisation. This is really important to understand where that level of risk occurs, because it's not always the same in the same areas for organisations. There tends to be a fairly common theme where the greatest level of risk is around those who drive high levels of mileage on business. But again, although there's a fairly obvious trend as to where those ultimate risk areas lie, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to be the case across the board. The need to do a risk assessment on a regular basis is very important. Again, accepting the policy, important to ensure that drivers are aware of the safety culture that an organisation is looking to implement, and obviously targeted intervention is very, very important as well, in the sense that completely pointless producing a risk assessment process for an organisation and at no point looking to put an intervention in place to mitigate that risk once those risk assessments have been completed. So a little bit around hierarchy of control, and what's really important from this perspective is implementing the control measures in the right order, which is where we found a lot of organisations tend to not necessarily approach it in the right frame of mind to start with. Very often we find that our customers will come to us and say, you know, we've got really, really bad collision rate within the organisation. We want to train everybody. You know, everybody should do some sort of training, which, you know, even before that point, the first thing that you should be looking at is, well, why is that collision rate high? You know, what are the factors that are, you know, contributing to that, and what could be put into place to mitigate that from day one? So that's where the first part comes in, which is the remove, which is, you know, things that could potentially increase that risk. You know, things like how much travelling are, you know, high mileage drivers doing? Is there potential to remove some of those journeys that are potentially unnecessary by things like webinars, you know, telephone conversation? That's definitely an important area. And again, things like territories, one thing that we come across as being quite a key factor in terms of territories can be very, very large, especially in certain areas of the country, i.e. Scotland, southwest of the country. And again, whilst not always necessarily something that can be changed straight away, something whereby there needs to be some thought process in place in order to mitigate that. So I guess that then comes on to the next bit, which is how to substitute for a safer alternative. So things like effective journey planning, potential use for public transport. Is it better to take a train, be able to work whilst you're on the train? Things like that that often are not within a policy and not particularly well communicated, even if they are in a policy. Again, they're the sort of things that are particularly important when thinking about where those risk areas occur. And then going on to kind of managing, really, so things like overnight stays. Is it better to, you know, to think of staying overnight before a long journey? Again, sort of things that should be considered and should always be within a fleet safety policy. And again, things like, you know, regular breaks whilst driving, taking a break every 2 hours, all things that should be communicated to drivers. So our feeling is very much that driver training alone is certainly not the answer, and it's very easy to make the assumption that if you've got X number of drivers who potentially, you know, are speeding, and you know that through collision data, maybe telemetry data as well, that is the problem. But why are those drivers, you know, speeding? Is it because they're expected to make 14 appointments a day, and, you know, realistically 10 appointments is probably the ceiling that they can achieve? And again, these are things that have to be looked at organisational level and reviewed at senior management level to see where potentially you can reduce the potential for speeding. We would definitely say as well that speeding drivers should always be treated the same as post-collision drivers. The process should be very much a case of looking to reduce the potential, irrespective of how many collisions may have happened previously. And this is where, for a lot of organisations, we recommend that line manager and supervisor buy-in is very important, and that the emphasis should be on the responsibility of line manager and supervisors to establish where the root cause of that incident could occur, especially in situations like the example I just used, where, you know, you may well be in a sales-driven role where it's extremely important to keep selling, you know, as part of your role, and actually, you know, that level of pressure that's on you by the business, is that an acceptable level of pressure, and does that lead you to be in a position where you're more likely to potentially speed? very important to think that changes at an organisational level could be more effective than at individual level in terms of interventions. And this, again, touching on what Sergio mentioned previously in the last presentation, this is where the safety culture and implementing that culture within the business is absolutely key. So in terms of training interventions, where possible, training should always be a very much targeted approach, and the targeted approach might come from results from an individual's risk assessment, could come from telemetry data, could come from things like convictions, driving licence endorsements, and collision data that's held by the organisation. And certainly where convictions occur for speeding, another thing that I think is that line managers should very much look to take debriefs, have a look and see, are organisational pressures a contributory factor? Is it just down to driver behaviour? Is there potential for other pressures that could be a factor within that? The training that is implemented, if implemented, should always be very much targeted at where the risk occurs. So, as an example, if you have a driver who has picked up 3 speeding fines within a very short period of time, and they're not on the motorway, they're all within rural areas, and that's been established as part of the debrief process, training should always be targeted around the areas where that sort of thing has occurred. So no point in spending that time if it's a behind the wheel session tailored to driving on the motorway, where actually, the real risk area is around driving in rural areas. And again, there should always be a focus on demonstrating the consequences of speeding, and how just very small differences in things like approach speed can make a significant difference. Going back to David's introduction in terms of stopping distances, a very powerful message that puts across, and how that can make a difference. Things like varying road conditions and the impact that can have, very important. And things that very often do get missed and isn't necessarily something that a driver would be thinking about is vehicle maintenance. Are your tyre pressures checked on a regular basis? Things like tread depths, all things that will have a significant bearing on potential. Training should also look to cover risks associated with distracted driving, which I think most people agree is something that has been on the up in recent years with things like satellite navigation and what have you. And just things like converting miles per hour to feet per second is a real visual image of just how speeding can have a massive effect. And just taking your eyes off the road for a few seconds, a significant distance of blind travelling, and what sort of effect that can have in terms of managing your speed. Continuing on in reference to training interventions, it's important to remember that those interventions shouldn't just be aimed at drivers, line managers and travel planners, PAs. It should very much be a supportive environment, certainly through journey planning and doing that effectively. Again, this comes back to the safety culture within the business and buy-in across the board. And in terms of training, that alone, we certainly advise our customers that training alone is effective and does make a difference, but things like regular communications and bulletins around safe driving, and getting drivers within an organisation to be constantly thinking about safety and their own safety and safety of others whilst driving, and the effects that it can have. And in terms of, I guess, safe driving, safe speed, a huge part of that culture. Just through some of the previous slides and the effects that not driving consistently at a safe speed and across the organisation, the effect that can have certainly when you're looking to implement a culture within the business from you, which is always quite a challenging thing to put into place. And certainly following training sessions of any type, there should certainly be, where possible, the opportunity to look to measure where driving performance has improved. Telemetry data, very useful, gauging how performance has improved post-training. Things like mobile telematics, again, they can be very, very useful as well for that purpose. And that's what an organisation is looking to achieve, is ensuring that there is something that can actually measure where the benefits are and that driver performance has improved as a result. So on to safety culture, and from our experience, certainly the most challenging but important thing to take into account when looking to implement an improved or initially a safety culture from scratch, so to speak, is it's got to be implemented very, very successfully. And you will find, and again, this comes back to what Sergio mentioned previously in terms of buy-in from drivers around things like telematics and the big brother effect. Implementing a safety culture within an organisation has to be effective from senior management level, and having buy-in so that everybody within the business has a buy-in to what the organisation is looking to achieve with the safety culture that they're introducing. We too tend to find that interventions they don't tend to be as successful, and they are harder to roll out and get if you don't have the buy-in. And what we have found from some of our customers is that from a training perspective, the first individuals within the business, whether they do high or low annual mileage from a business perspective, they'll put the senior management team through. So that's a really good way of getting buy-in from above in ensuring that senior management are aware of the process and what they're looking to achieve for the organisation. And again, things like line manager appraisals. How often as a business, or as an organisation, does driver safety and looking at things like speed come onto the agenda? In many cases, not at all. In some cases, very rarely. So again, as part of any culture, that should always be something that's encouraged, certainly at line manager level as well. Things like incentive schemes are often quite successful in terms of driving driver performance and improving. Things like fuel savings are always going to be a useful way of measuring and implementing that. Things like safety scores of telemetry data, almost having 10 top drivers, the 10 not so good drivers. And again, these are things that in some organisations have demonstrated and helped drive that driver performance improvement. And as part of the initial risk assessment, attitude to speed, which again is quite an important one, should be gauged and assessed, and things like doing climate surveys to measure how attitudes within the organisation potentially changed as part of the safety culture implementation is another good way of assessing how that has changed. So to kind of really then, I guess, to summarise sort of what we've discussed, it's really important to understand those risks in the first instance before implementing any kind of control measure. Those root causes of those incidents, really important to understand those. We find working with a lot of customers that there tends to be quite common themes that have led to incidents occurring and higher collision rates, and a lot of those are very much at organisational level as opposed to maybe driver behaviour / attitude level. The hierarchy of control is without a doubt the most important part of any implementation control measure wise to ensure that the policy, the organisation as a whole, has certainly the right procedures in place to really mitigate the potential for the risk. The senior management buy-in, as I've touched on, really, really important and effective. For it to really be successful, that is absolutely key. And a good safety culture is always going to significantly improve effectiveness of any training interventions. Drivers understanding why you're looking to implement a safety culture, improve what safety culture may exist previously. The better that's communicated, without a doubt, the better and more effective that will be. And again, at managerial level, there should always be a good example set. And the programme as a whole should always be measured. Attitudes, without a doubt, measurable data, absolutely. Things like telemetry, convictions, collision information via insurance stats, all really, really important things to take into account. Thank you for listening. That's everything from myself. Quite happy to answer any questions if anybody has any.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Nigel, for that really in-depth presentation, and I think some really key points there that backs kind of brakes messaging, and I know Applied Driving Techniques has been a big supporter of Breakout over the years, so it's really good to kind of see the messaging that we try and get across being implemented there. So as Nigel said, if anybody does have any questions at all, then do feel free to put those to us either in the question box or if you'd like to raise your hand. So we've got one question come in from David Campbell again for yourself, Nigel. Do you have any tips on measuring attitudes?
When we say measuring attitudes, what, exclusive of telemetry data or purely by just attitude alone? I
guess, I mean, I'll wait to see if David types in the slide, but I guess he's talking about...
The way I would answer that is, again, I would have to use our own risk assessment process probably to answer that best. So as part of our risk assessment process that we have, there's an initial section within that assessment which has some questions around driver attitudes, questions essentially. So what we would look to do is take the overall responses to those attitude questions and look to draw some trend analysis over, you know, maybe like a 2 to 3 year period, and then look to kind of link those to things like collision data, what have you, insurance claim stats. So, for example, you know, the compliance process that we introduce for many customers, we would look to then kind of tailor how they look year on year in terms of what driver attitudes are, should we say, and if there is any particular shift in certain areas. But a great example might be one like, do you ever undertake on the motorway whilst driving, as an example, or what are your attitudes towards 20-mile-an-hour speed limits, as an example. What we would look to do is see if there is any particular shift in trend between how an organisation of drivers would answer those initial questions, probably over a period of, say, 1 to 2 to 3 year on year, and actually also then link that to things like collision data, you know, claim stats, and actually see if there's any correlation between the two. Probably the best way I can answer that.
Brilliant. I think that's spot on, Nigel. Yeah, thank you very much. I think it's an interesting one, and one there that you can draw a correlation with, like you say, between attitudes and then how those poor attitudes then show themselves as driver behaviour and eventually, I guess, as incidents on the roads as well. So no, thank you very much. There's no more questions at the moment, but if you do have any questions that you suddenly think of, then do let us know during this, and we can easily come back to Nigel if we have time at the end. So next we're going to move on to a couple of case studies and a couple of businesses who have really tackled this issue of speeding and made really good progress. So I'm now going to hand you over to Rachel Downs and Holly Bradshaw from Travis Perkins.
Afternoon everybody. I'm going to start. So my name is Rachel Downs. I'm the Group Transport Risk and Driver Development for Travis Perkins. So Travis Perkins is a FTSE 100 company, and we have around about 19 businesses within the TP group. And we are one of the largest builders merchants in the UK, so obviously our fleet is quite large and increasing by the day. Our fleet has increased by about 1,000 vehicles over the past month, and our drivers are 5,000 plus. So it is something that we have to tackle quite a lot with regards to speeding. I'm going to hand you over to Holly Bradshaw, who is the Solution Design Manager for Travis.
Good afternoon. Oh, sorry, it's gone too far.
No, it is what happened. Yeah.
So with over 5,000 drivers that are working for us, the company has a duty of care for our colleagues and an obligation to ensure that our vehicles are driven in a safe and lawful manner. All our commercial fleet is identifiable by the general public, so poor driving in a company branded vehicle may affect the perception of the brand. The tracking system that's installed in all our vehicles records the speed of the vehicle and then compares this to the maximum speed a vehicle of that type is allowed to travel along the road. The initiative was originally implemented in September 2013 and we focused on targeting vehicles that travelled in excess of 30% of the speed limit for more than a minute. We have worked hard to get engagement from the company, having various meetings with HR and the business leads to ensure everyone involved is comfortable with the initiative and how it is implemented and rolled out across the businesses. Using the data that's available from the tracking system, the team have downloaded the raw data every day for each vehicle per business. This is done as a mass download per website. This data is then imported into a report that's been created by my team, which collates the daily data summarising the amount of speed and instances captured each day for a monthly report. Within the report, there's a RAG scoring system that has been created highlighting the amount of instances that each vehicle and brand has had within the month period. Those branches whose vehicles receive no speeding instances are banded as green and receive a certificate from the head office. Branches receiving 1 to 10 instances within the month are scored as amber, and those branches that have 11 or more instances are branded as red. The report shows how well the group have done that month by business brand. It then compares the selected brand on a rolling 12-month basis. This is then broken down into regional director level to show the last 12 months comparison. So it shows how well they've been doing each month and whether the speeding is going up or down. Along with this, a separate report is created at the same time, and it's created for the RD to give him the list of branches and vehicles, and it gives the number of offences within the month. These reports are then published to the whole business so that the CEO right down to the driver and yard staff are able to see how our drivers are doing. There is an opportunity so that drivers can dispute that the tracking system has said that they are speeding when actually the road that they've been driving along is incorrect on the system. So we are now working very closely with the tracking team to get the updates of errors changed from quarterly to monthly, if not weekly, to make sure that the report that we are creating is still relevant to the business. As previously mentioned, the team have worked very closely with HR and the business leads to ensure the policy was accurate and manageable and setting the banding rules in a coaching process. The following slides are the information packs that we sent out to every branch and to the home address of every driver so everyone was clear of the policy. It highlights the disciplinary process that the company expect the branch manager to follow for poor driving. It starts off with an informal chat with the driver once an incident is identified. Within the next 3 months of the first incident occurring, a verbal warning is then given with any substantial incidents that occur within the next 3 months. Followed by this, a written warning is given within 6 months, a final written warning is given within 9 months, and eventually resulting with the driver being removed from driving duties if incidents are still occurring within 12 months from the first initial findings. Within the pack, there is a step-by-step guide within the document explaining how to check that the system for the driver to be found the speeding data. And along in the pack is a process of how to conduct the process and any coaching tips. This is the other side of the document that we give out, and it continues to give guidance on how to conduct an investigation and what to do with the information that's gathered. We obviously mentioned in there that Travis Perkins is a proud supporter of Brake. We also supply each branch with a poster. Within the poster, it highlights the actual speed limits for certain vehicle types that are used within the business for the different road types. The poster promotes that these are limits and not targets, and that 3 points is 3 points, as your commercial vehicle and car licence are the same. We've had to have a look at obviously how we've had to change the culture of the business for them to be able to accept this. So it's not been as difficult as we first thought that it would be. Once the initiative was never recognised and backed by our CEO, John Carter, John helped push the initiative and the expectations out to the businesses. Even managers and directors have had trackers fitted into their cars to help support the campaign. My team have attended branch managers' meetings to get engagement with the initiative. When first discussing it with the managers, their argument was that they were too busy with too many deliveries that had to be done. Our argument back was that this is the law and speed limits should not be getting broken, and if they are operating illegally, which ultimately could end up with the company losing our O licence. At the end of the day, if they're too busy, then they should be requesting another vehicle. With the ability to dispute the data and prove the system is not correct, it's helped get the buy-in from the drivers, as they feel that they are beating the system, which obviously drivers love to do. They're constantly doing it with our route management system. Since April this year, we have changed our policy to report on offences that are 15% over the road speed limit for more than 30 seconds, due to the continuous engagement from the business. I'll hand you back over to Rachel, who looks after the risk assessors.
We have a team of risk assessors within the business. There's 15 of them. You can see by the dots on the map whereabouts they're based. They were brought into the business to go out with our commercial drivers and to assess them once a year, which we did over the past sort of 18 months. We were able to get around to all of our drivers and give them an assessment. So where we focus now is more on risk. So we want to look at the high-risk drivers and the average risk drivers. The risk assessors do a background check on the drivers, so that does include all points and looking at their licences. We do get our licences checked directly with the DVLA now. That was implemented about 3 years ago by my department. We get everyone's licence is checked every 6 months, so that's company cars, grey fleet and our commercial drivers. If anyone has 6 or more points on their licence, they are checked on a monthly basis. So when we're going out to the drivers, we can have this background check. We can talk to them about the speed and if there's been any instances. Obviously, we use different systems as well to do other background checks on our drivers. But speeding is one that we keep an eye on, and the risk assessors do. And obviously, because there's 15 of them, we can actually get around a little bit better than what we used to be able to do when we were assessing everybody. So I think focusing on these high-risk drivers that do have high points on their licence and maybe do have a high flow of accidents, we can go out and risk assess them more frequently to make sure that they are abiding by the law and trying to understand why they feel it is that they speed, because obviously it is against the law. These are just a few initiatives that we've done in Travis Perkins, just to get everyone's input and get everybody working towards the same message that we're trying to set out, that speeding is against the law and it won't be taken upon lightly within the Travis Perkins PLC. We've been out to schools, and we've also been out to country parks, and also for Road Safety Week last year did a big incentive, did a course in our car park with the go-kart, just to highlight that, you know, if you are going fast, you are going to miss out on stuff. The hazards on the roads, passers-by. So it was good to try and get other people's input into that and to make other people think, because then they go back to their families as well and talk to them about speeding and the dangerous road users that we have out there. And that's it from us. So if anyone has any questions, back to you, Dave.
Brilliant, thank you very much. That's really really helpful. I mean, I've got one to start with. Obviously, you mentioned about getting your CEO on board to start with, and how obviously once you've got that buy-in from the top, then obviously it's much easier and makes your role and job a lot easier to then get that buy-in further down. I mean, the question that I think David Campbell asked earlier to Sergio, I mean, how did you find driver buy-in, and how did you kind of sell it to them? Was it something that they were kind of told that they had to comply with and do because it's being backed by your CEO, or did you have much confrontation, and kind of how did you deal with drivers on a kind of area-to-area basis, really, to kind of overcome any concerns that they had about speeding?
Because the tracking system had been in the vehicles for more than 6-7 years before we implemented the speeding policy, the drivers were quite used to having the tracking system in there. It was the branch managers that we had more of the issue with, because they were more concerned that they wouldn't get the deliveries done. whereas the drivers felt more relaxed that they now had the proof that they shouldn't be rushing around and doing speeding just to get their deliveries done. So to them, it was a backup for them, so they were very quite supportive of what we've been doing.
Brilliant. No, thanks very much. And you said about some of your initiatives there, and obviously kind of supporting Road Safety Week. How once you've raised awareness and kind of spoken to your drivers about the dangers of speeding, and obviously as a company, they might be more concerned about the financial cost, but obviously as a driver you want to get across that message of them being involved in a crash, and obviously if they're injured or killed somebody, the devastation effect it would have on them. Since you've kind of spoken to them and gone through that, how have you found support for your events such as Road Safety Week and the other initiatives that you've introduced at Travis Perkins? Have you found that drivers feel quite passionate to get on board with that because actually they do now realise the consequences?
Yeah, I mean, since we've been working with Break and the initiatives that we've sent out, they have been taken on board really well. Some of our drivers have actually gone back to their families and then gone to their children's school to put some of these initiatives in and taken vehicles and stuff there as well. So the buy-in has been really, really good. I think it's just raising that initial awareness and actually making people think and then getting them on board is what we were trying to do, which is what we have done. So it's not just here at head office, it's throughout the country, the rest of our branches as well, that people are doing their buy-ins and doing their own sort of thing as well. And we welcome them to do any sort of initiatives that they want to do to raise an awareness to their local area.
We also work with third parties as well who get in contact with us, like the police and stuff like that. So we'll go away with them and we'll go and do days out, and we'll take one of our vehicles and one of our drivers to explain how our vehicle works, what the systems on our vehicles do, how their safety is there to protect them, and why they shouldn't cross in front of a lorry, why they shouldn't cross behind it, why they shouldn't cycle up against it, because we'll let them sit in the cab. So we have been working quite closely with a lot of different authorities as well as our own drivers.
And finally, I guess, did you find there was any difference or any changes you had to make regionally? You showed a brilliant map there, kind of showing obviously the whole of the UK that you cover, and obviously rural parts of Scotland compared to inner city London, different road types, different situations. Did you find that actually your messaging that you had to get across to your drivers, did it change at all, or did you find actually you could come up with a model which actually was relevant whether you lived down in Cornwall or whether you lived in Glasgow?
No, not at all. It's totally different wherever you go. We actually have a project within the M25 area as well, where we do a different training session with our drivers now, because this was highlighted about 9 months ago. So with the fact that London is quite congested, we need to make sure that the drivers are more aware of all the obstacles that they have, and I think everyone probably knows how tough it is to drive in London, so it's totally different for all of my guys depending on where they're based, to be honest with you.
No, that's brilliant. And just a final one here from Robert Theobald. He's just saying obviously with regards to a sample policy document, is it possible for people after this to receive a copy of that, or have you got kind of a policy document that could be made available for others to kind of have a look at a template?
You already have it. I think we've sent one through to Richard and Nelly before, but yeah, we're happy to share it again if need be. But I know that we took all our branding off of it, and I think we shared it, but we can send it through again if need be. And
brilliant, no worries. Excellent, thank you very much. So hopefully that will... Yeah, but no, I will do, and Robert just said thank you as well. So I will dig that out for you, Robert, and circulate that after this presentation as well. So thank you very much, Holly and Rachel, for your presentation there, and hopefully that has given you an idea and some food for thought as well. So finally, now we'll hand over to our final presenter, who is Andy Kemp. From Tesco.com. So hopefully, Andy, you can hear us, and I will hand over to yourself.
Yep. Can you see my presentation?
Yep, I can. Well, I can see your screen. If you just.
Sorry.
That's all right. Brilliant. Yes,
see it.
fantastic.
Okay.
So I'll hand
good.
over to Andy now. Thank you.
Right. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll keep it as brief. Basic role as occupational road measures. Oh, can you hear me still? Anyone hear me?
Yeah, we can still hear you, Andy. That's
Sorry, it's just a kind of message come up on my screen. Right, okay then. So my job fundamentally is to protect the brand for Tesco. We started off back in 1997 with one van. That's grown to 4,500, growing fast. We cover over 120 million miles now, and we have more than in excess of 15,000 drivers. We were very good at running stores. We weren't very good at actually having a van fleet. That was very new to the business, as was myself when this first started. So going back in 2005, for no other reason rather than the sheer cost of the van damage, we started to look at how to curb our van drivers' behaviour and lower our costs. Now, there's obviously an awful lot of benefits have come out of that retrospectively, but initially, I won't lie to you, it was from our director saying it's costing us too much money. That was a commonplace. That was in Croydon. The parked car down, or the broken car on the bottom right-hand side, started off up by the police officer in the middle of the road. We had no technology whatsoever to find out what happened. We had to take the driver's point of view as such. It just happened. I didn't know what was going on. The dog ran across the road, etc. So we started to think about what we could do to improve our van fleet and our safety. These sorts of accidents were commonplace. We would deliver into fields at high speed, and we'd go over Humpback Bridge in Wales and actually physically snap a van in half. Now, at the time, we had an attitude or a policy that anybody who could walk or talk could drive one of our vans. So we approached ROSPA to work at developing an in-house driver training team. That's not to say that external companies don't work. Tesco is a huge concern. It employs over 350,000 people as an entity. We have an awful lot of drivers now. We're working around that environment and touching a lot of people in our own business as well as externally. And our desire was to have a training team that could control our drivers that also could be performance managed in its own right. So it's not just buying somebody in. If our trainers aren't working properly, we can do something about it. We started to assess our drivers because, as you can see, most people thought that obviously if you had a driving license, that was enough. So we employ people who have quality with no additional driving qualifications, not LGV, HGV or PSV drivers. They're just normal drivers and bring those sort of problems with us, which we didn't realise how to work with to start off with. So we started to assess, and we were finding 19 out of 20 people that we would normally have embarked in the business. We train our drivers. Our training team as such are independent. There's 60 of them now. So they're part of Tesco.com. They're on Tesco.com's payroll, but they're separate for the stores. So there's no leaning on someone to say, well, come on, employ that guy. He's good enough to drive for us. What's the problem? We validate our drivers. We go out on a one-to-one basis with them to make sure they're capable of doing their work and their job role. That's usually done in the first 12 weeks of joining the business after they've had their standard training. Now, reviewing our drivers, this is where we started to come further down the line of our journey. To manage behaviours was a problem for us. We could review performance, we could coach underperformance and manage poor performance. Having the buy-in of the main board wasn't so much of a problem. Again, as some of our previous speakers have said, it tends to be the on-site management team and HR team that are very aloof to work with stroke manage a driver. They're quite worried about the reporting systems and quite worried about the impact to the business. They've been historically used to turning a blind eye in many cases. One of our main tools that started to change the behaviour of our drivers and reducing speed and reducing accidents was what we call our ARB call, Accident Review Board call. Now that's where people from head office will read out information regarding an accident or an incident that's totally been anomalised as such. It's just a van at a time doing X, Y and Z. And other drivers on the conference call will determine whether that's preventable or non-preventable. It's not to do with management whatsoever. If it's found out to be preventable, then, pardon me, the management team will come in and task on what scale of intervention that will take, whether that's just a word in somebody's ear or a day's driver training out with a qualified driver trainer. It allows us to target our training based on other professional drivers' opinions rather than the argument of, well, what would you people in head office understand? So it's given us a sense of reality that the drivers have bought in good style. They had no real complaints about that at all. Coaching underperformance, we've worked on notice of intent of prosecution. They've reduced dramatically. Our insurers give us an awful lot of feedback. Customers are very keen to ring up and say you've been carved up by a van with a telephone number on the back-end side of it on who to ring up and complain. The accident review board works well. Customer service centre gives an awful lot of information about our driver behaviour. Customers will ring up if they've left their driveway in a poor condition. Maintenance providers give us a lot of information regarding damage that's not reported by the drivers but is picked up on regular servicing, which is fed into a database which I'll talk to you briefly in a second. And then the Safer Driving Reports telematics underpin an awful lot of what we do. It's that really we tend to use it slightly different to an awful lot of other people. Each day at 4 o'clock in the morning, unfortunately we start work very early in .com, a driving report will be produced which will give 3 key indicators to a manager of whether a driver should be suspended immediately or just have coaching further down the line. So for argument's sake, if you're found through our telematics to be doing 20 miles an hour or more over the posted speed limit and that's evidenced by somebody checking the site, then you will leave Tesco. Exactly the same with if you leave your vehicle idling and there's telematics involved, we can tell if you delivered to the customer with an electronic PDF which you sign. So we've broken the geo-fence, made the delivery, left the delivery, engine was never switched on, off, that's an offence, again you go. This is very, very clearly explained to the drivers at the time they join the business, so we've had a very little comeback about that sort of thing. That's our Safer Driving Report. There's a nicer version of it, a more modern version. It has all the standard stuff about miles per gallons, idling, harsh braking, speeding. Now we use contextual speeding in the context of performance management in the way that we would find an event which is based on our risk database now, where information comes down, we get a grading for each driver based on, you can't see that very clearly, but licenses, points on license, accidents, incidents, prosecutions, I won't read them all out. That gives us a scorecard of behaviour as well as incidents. As they migrate up the scorecard, that gives us the targeted training to work on. This is our contextual speeding, which is very useful. When they break certain parameters, the database will be receiving information from our telematics, which will give us a time, place, grid reference, which we can then drill down to using Google Maps whilst we sit down with the driver to say, that was you at that time, do you think that's reasonable behaviour? It creates a very, very self-leveling process, so it's not a conflict at all. We're not going to beat you up as such. We will do because there's performance management involved, but fundamentally, that's you, that's the time of day, that's the side of the road you were driving at, and if you were going past the school, do you think that's acceptable behaviour? Now, during this process of using telematics, when it was first installed, there was a tremendous backlash from the drivers. They would literally open cans of Coke and pour them over the electronics and kill the machine, physically rip the machine out, cut the cables, various other behaviours. This changed when one of our drivers was involved in a fatal accident outside Brighton University, where basically a cyclist was killed instantaneously when he came into contact with the side of our van. Now the telematics information we were able to provide to the police within minutes stroke hours made it the process of the implication that our driver was not at fault much, much quicker. So we will now use these incidences, and fortunately we don't have many serious stroke fatal accidents, as a method of working with the drivers to say that the telematics is there for their defence, so false allegations, your driver cut me up, accidents that never took place. So it's a way that we've worked with our drivers to say that your outreach driver, you're on your own, it's your defence mechanism to make sure you stay within the speed limits. We will track that behaviour, which is good behaviour, and if something goes wrong, you've got your evidence electronically that can be downloaded, and that will be your defence in court, which settled the drivers down immensely virtually overnight. So moving forwards, the black line at the top is our van damage, approximately, and the growth bars in blue are the growth of the vans. And it was really introduced that in 2005 we actually started to work with our drivers and engage with our drivers on many things as well as speeding. It was the big sea change for Tesco, because before it was just an outreach driver, out the back, out of sight, out of mind fundamentally, and no one engaged with the drivers. Now we engage with the drivers on an annual basis, and prior to induction and induction, we have a massive improvement on driver behaviour and a big reduction in driver turnover, which with the numbers of drivers we employ is very, very helpful to us. As I said, these figures are up to date because at 2010 we started to almost stop tracking notices of intent of prosecution purely because the numbers were going so low, it would be a graph looking a little bit foolish really. So they come in single figures now rather than the multiples which we used to have. We do alcohol test our drivers as well, post pre-accidents, as a backup to support better driver behaviour as well as the speeding behaviour which we're all involved in. And we do support various organisations such as Brake, but unfortunately I forgot to put Brake on the slide, so I do apologise. And 9 years on, we feel in a much, much better place to move forwards. So that really is me. I've tried to make that as abridged, short as I possibly could. Any questions?
Brilliant, thank you, Andy. I think that's a really in-depth kind of review of where you were all those years ago and kind of how far you've moved from there. I mean, when you first got involved in looking at those statistics originally, and that first image of that wagon on its side, and the fact that you had nothing in place, I mean, are you surprised at how far you have come, and you know, did you ever think that you would be able to kind of achieve what you've achieved now?
If I'm honest, when I first joined the business, I didn't think we would be able to achieve what we've achieved, purely because it was such a culture change, where you've got a very, very upbeat, strident road safety team being embedded into a business which is so big that you may have a very clear message, but it's getting into the right ears of the right people and consistently banging the drum across probably 330 sites we operate from, and trying to keep those central, what I call middle management, if you like, on the ground, who run the individual departments, to have faith in the process, in the system, in the hardware and software, that if it comes to performance management, don't be afraid of using it. Then we get the buy-in from the drivers, because most drivers, we share our vans. So all drivers want to get into a clean van that's pleasant to drive, it doesn't smell, and work for a company that's got a good reputation. Most of the guys wouldn't want to work for what, with layman's terms, is a bandit company. They do have pride in their job. It's just we tended in the past to dismiss them as professional drivers because they were just deemed as van drivers. So now we engage with them far more, then there's a far, far better buy-in and a massive improvement in behaviour.
I think that's it, and I think the word used there, engagement, is key with that as well. We've got a couple of questions here from Stuart Lee, so I'll ask the first one first. He says about when you mentioned there about your accident review board, he says, how often does the accident review board meet to determine whether collisions were preventable or not?
That's every Friday.
So every week?
Yeah, we have every week. We have 4 conference calls which drivers will attend, just to make them short and sweet, so there's not a massive amount of pressure on one person. And those drivers will work in tandem with the training managers.
So I think that goes on to the next question. It was basically how many drivers or employees are involved in the review board? It's a random dip test of the entire driving force, basically. We would work with the driver training managers to say, don't use the same store, go from one operation to another, and sort of promote the importance of the ARB call, purely because then other drivers want to get on it to see how it works, what's involved. And of course you then get the trickle of information coming back from the drivers that goes across the entire state, that when someone went on the ARB call, some of them are quite funny, and some are very, very serious,
but they get the buy-in that actually the drivers are heard. Because if they say there's not enough information, or I can't make my mind up on the information given, it gets sent back. No one gets their arm pushed up their backs. If they can't generally say preventable, non-preventable, it goes back for further information. And we can't override it. If the drivers say that's non-preventable, it's left. We can't go, whoa, 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 hang on a minute, what about X, Y, and Z? It's up to us to show the evidence clearly and fairly, and for the guys to make their minds up without any pressure whatsoever. And that's when you get the buy-in from the drivers and the unions, that it's not management enforcing change, it's the drivers basically enforcing change themselves.
Yeah, and it's about changing, like you say, about changing that driver behaviour as well. And have you found that you said about this kind of whole cultural change and changing driver behaviour as well, and how that's changed? Have you found actually that more and more, it's had knock-on effects in other aspects of the business? For example, kind of using mobile phones, wearing seat belts, other distractions that are obviously key concerns. Have you managed to kind of use this model and use that in other areas of your business?
Yes, we have. I can't talk for anything outside .com, I'm afraid. Our grey fleet is looked after by a different group of people altogether. But within .com, the pickup of seatbelt usage, mobile phone not usage, has landed very well. Because initially we did have hands-free kits in our vans, because it was put in with the best intention of that's a safety measure compared with using a mobile phone whilst driving. We realised it was an intervention to the driver's concentration, so we took all the van kits out and then said, here is a mobile phone for your safety, because they are outreach drivers, but you only use it when you're stationary. And we can cross-match phone calls with the telematics to find out whether the vehicle was moving when the phone was used. So again, once this information cuts across the estate, drivers are self-regulating to a great degree. They want to do a good job, and when you certainly do to put driver scoreboards up, and Mr. Smith is down the bottom, Mr. Smith wants to get back up to the top. So they do regulate themselves very well. It's just making sure that you genuinely do listen to them, and if there's a problem they have, we act on it rather than go, well, that's fine, and because it's not a benefit to us. So once you set that motion going that drivers are important, you have to sustain that. So if they give you some bad news or require a change which may impact the business, you can't just turn your back on that point. That has to be changed as well.
No, that's brilliant. I think that kind of echoes the points that it's kind of the theme that's gone through this, is about working with drivers and showing that it's there as a safety measure and not just to monitor them. And it's quite interesting there how you say about the sudden change in attitudes because of that one incident where there's a fatality involving a cyclist, and it's a shame that it's had to result in a fatality before people have had that buy-in. But I suppose it's positive in the sense that you can use that as a way of showing that telematics and the data is there to be used to benefit them. I mean, do you? I'm not expecting you to have all information to the top of your head, but do you find that now generally actually the information that you've got and data that can help resolve customer complaints is used more positive, as a positive rather than a negative to show up a driver? It's actually used more to kind of defend that driver, and as a company you can stick by that driver.
That's right. When it comes to allegations of driver behaviour, an awful of the time it's used as a defence. We do have road drivers. We live in the real world, and they're dealt with accordingly. But it is a very good tool, really, is because they are remote. It's the only independent tool we've got to say, well, actually, the telematics tell us this. Your story doesn't add up, but then again, nor does the third party's allegation. So what really has gone on here? And the truth does come out more than 9 times out of 10. So it does have a very supportive place in our workplace anyway.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Andy, for your time and for your presentation there. And hopefully people will have found that that particularly useful. So just a final few points really before we wrap up, I appreciate it's just gone past, so thank you very much for everybody who's held on for this. So here are some upcoming events that are listed on our website. So in particular, earlier I mentioned about our pledge campaign and some of the messaging that we get out there. For those of you who aren't members of Break Pro, this pledge webinar is a real good eye-opener really of what we can offer. For example, Robert Theobald, I know you've sent a message here about kind of video clips and also what we've got in particular with regards to speeding. So those visuals that I showed in my introduction are part of our pledge and how we can engage drivers through our training. So actually that is something that we can look at doing and working with you. So I will email you separately after this. But anybody who has been involved with Break for a while before but not actually looked at our pledge or is new to Break, I do recommend that you attend one of our pledge webinars. The next one is on the 25th of June. Other key events that are coming up and are available on our website, we've got our Fleet Safety Awards on the 1st of October, so deadline for entries are in, and we've had a great number of entries this year which we will be celebrating. So on the 1st of October is our ceremony. This year we are celebrating 20 years of Break as well, so we promise to hopefully make this a great evening, and it would be great to see as many of you there as possible, whether you've entered the awards or not. It's a real great evening to celebrate fleet safety and all that's going on. So and it's a great networking opportunity in a more kind of casual and an enjoyable atmosphere. So really encourage anybody who's not attended before to come and join us, and those of you that have been year on year, we hope to see you again on the 1st of October. Another one of our big events is Road Safety Week on the 23rd to the 29th of November of this year. Many companies, as Holly and Rachel mentioned, from Travis Perkins and also Applied Driving Techniques, and I know lots of companies do get involved with Road Safety Week, and it is a great way to get across those key safety messages during our campaign week. So we will be running another online webinar in the build-up to Road Safety Week to give you ideas of how companies can get involved with Road Safety Week this year. So as well as giving you all our tools and resources, we will be giving you some ideas of how you can get involved with this year's theme and topic, and that will be a really important kind of week for us. And then obviously later in December we've got another event as well here in Huddersfield in West Yorkshire, so it'd be great to see many of you attending that. So thank you very much for attending today's webinar. As I mentioned previously, all the presentations will be available, and I will email you shortly after this webinar with a link to our website with all the presentations on it, and also a link to our guidance report. So we have a guidance for fleet managers which has been produced. For those of you who are members of Break Professional, you will already know that we produce a lot of guidance reports and advice sheet for drivers. For those of you who aren't members of Break Pro, this will be a brilliant example of what we do produce and why it would be a great idea for you to hopefully become a member of Break in the future. So there is Managing Driver Speed. It's something that was produced a couple of years ago, and actually Andy will remember this. Tesco.com is used as an example on this, so it's a brilliant kind of tool that's available out there, and it is on our website for members at the moment. So thank you again to all our speakers who've given up their time to present today. Thank you again to all of our attendees who've attended, and thank you to Telegis for sponsoring today's webinar. Hopefully you've got some really interesting tips from here. If you have any questions at all, then do feel free to email us and we can pass any questions on to anybody else. But thank you very much and have a good rest of the afternoon, and hopefully we will see you at one of our future events. Bye.